Who was the worst parent you've ever had to deal with? I had a parent of a kindergartner tell me, in all seriousness, that she was told by their church prophet that my student was sent to lead the world into salvation. Her little girl was the second coming of Christ. Gee, no pressure. Here, teach the Christ child to read. Plus, she was one of the meanest children I ever taught.
That's an interesting situation. I can imagine the pressure you felt. Teaching someone who's supposed to be a savior sounds heavy. It's wild how parents can project their beliefs onto kids. And having to deal with a tough student must have made it even more challenging. Balancing expectations and reality isn't easy. You probably needed a break after that.
My wife is the principal of an expensive Chinese daycare. Like really expensive. Every parent drives a BMW or better. A 3-year-old once ran away from the group during a field trip. The teacher, an incredibly mild woman, caught the kid and asked him if he thought what he did was good or bad. She didn't hit him, she didn't even criticize him or make him go in timeout. She just asked him if he thought it was a good thing to do. The mother freaked out, not because her child nearly went missing. She was furious that any type of discipline whatsoever was administered. My wife was on the phone with her until 2 a.m. while this woman screamed. She has no right to tell my child what to do. Who does she think she is? Fortunately, the woman became angry enough that she pulled her kid out a few days later. But that teacher is now so terrified to discipline her students that her class is out of control.
It's wild how some parents react. The teacher was just trying to guide the kid, but this mom flipped over what seemed like a simple question. It makes you think about how some people view discipline and authority. Now the teacher has to deal with this chaos because of one complaint. It's a tough spot for everyone, really. Just goes to show how intense the whole parenting scene can get sometimes.
I worked at a school for blind and visually impaired kids. This woman had a daughter that was blind and mentally delayed, but otherwise healthy. They were referred to our school when the daughter was in her mid-teens. Her mother did so much for this girl that she considered completely helpless. She was not. That her legs atrophied and she couldn't stand on her own. We dealt with our share of nightmare parents of various stripes, from the completely uninvolved to control freaks who knew every bureaucratic trick to pull to get what they wanted. But this one, the one that cared so much for her daughter that she crippled her even further, is the one I think back to the most often. It was a constant battle to get her to back off and let her daughter learn to be an independent person.
It's tough when love turns into overprotection. This mom really thought she was doing right by her daughter, but in the end, she just made things harder. The daughter had potential, but instead of supporting that, the mom's care led to limitations. It was a challenge trying to help both the girl and her mom understand what independence really meant. Sometimes you think you know what's best, but it can backfire.
A parent created an extremely extensive treatise on how the traditional methods of grading should be scrapped. They ended up emailing it to every staff member in the school. They did not, however, ever address the fact that their child did not turn in a single homework assignment between December and June.
It's kind of funny how some parents can be so passionate about education but overlook their kids' lack of effort. This one really thought they could change the system while their child was just coasting by. It's a classic case of pointing fingers instead of checking their own backyard. Makes you think about accountability, huh?
I'm not a teacher either, but my wife was one in a poor area near Chicago. I've heard 100 horror stories, but the one I always think about is this one. My wife's school was having a really hard time involving their parents in their kids' homework. The kids on average have poor test scores, poor intelligence, low motivation, etc. Common problems today. So what they tried to do was start an after-school program where parents would come in and help their kids with their homework. Kind of defeats the purpose of homework, but whatever. None of the parents showed up. Not surprising, I suppose. Here's where it gets interesting. so they decided they were going to raffle off a ham at each after-school homework event. Amazingly, parents started showing up. I would have to drive with my wife every once in a while to Walmart to buy a ham, because the parents showed up for a 1 in 500 chance to win a ham. They wouldn't come in for their kids, but they'd come in for a fucking chance at ham. Blows my mind to this day.
That's a wild story. It's interesting how sometimes people don't prioritize their kids' education, but offer them something unexpected and they show up. Using a raffle for a ham sounds so random but effective. It's kind of sad too, reflecting on what motivates some parents. Shows the realities of certain communities. Just goes to show that incentives can really change behavior, even if the reasons behind it are not what we hope for.
I used to teach this little boy who was so disruptive would shout and pinch the other children in the class. And when I complained to his parents, they said that he was a little angel at home and were shocked that I was saying that their boy was disruptive. They even said they thought I had the wrong child's parents in.
It's interesting how kids can act so differently in various environments. I used to have a friend who was super quiet at home but would turn into a class clown at school. It baffled his parents when teachers complained. They really thought he was perfect. Sometimes, I guess, kids just feel the need to express themselves in different ways, and it's hard for parents to see that.
I was working in Saudi Arabia about 8 years ago, and I had one kid who was the cousin of someone who was the cousin's cousin of the Prince of Saudi Arabia. He came the first day and signed up for the class, and I never saw him again. In fact, I actually removed him from the attendance. At the end of the course, she showed up the last day to collect his diploma. I told him he wasn't getting one because he didn't attend a single class. He stormed out of the class, calling me names the entire way. A few hours later, this little shit shows up with half of Saudi Arabia. His mother, father, uncles, aunts, brothers, the whole damn family. I was called in the office by the dean and spent the next 30 minutes being screamed at by my boss, half the staff, and his belligerent family. Didn't I know who he was? How dare I not give him what he asked for? I was docked a month's pay, and I ended up quitting 2 months later. Oh, and he graduated the class. With honors, of course.
Sounds like a tough situation. You're just doing your job, and then this kid shows up out of nowhere, expecting special treatment. Getting called in like that must have been awkward, especially with the whole family there. Losing a month's pay isn't easy either. It's crazy how some connections can change everything. At least he got his diploma, even if he didn't earn it. Just a reminder that some things aren't always fair.
This is easy. This was over 35 years ago. I once had twin girls in my sophomore general business class. They were nice girls, didn't talk much. It didn't take me long to realize that they were struggling. They never completed any quizzes or tests, just returned the papers blank. No homework. I tried contacting the parents, couldn't reach them. Talked to the principal, the counselor, the social worker. No luck. Finally, I went to the house. The girls were there alone, said their mother was at the store. I stopped back at the house a couple of times later in the week. Still nothing. Eventually, the girls didn't show up in class, and the principal said they had left school. I never met this parent, but she was definitely the worst one I ever had to deal with.
It's tough when kids fall through the cracks like that. You can try everything to help, but sometimes the system just fails. Those girls needed support but didn't get it. It's frustrating knowing that some parents are just not involved. It's sad, really. You want to reach out, but there's only so much you can do, especially when communication falls apart. It makes you think about how many kids are in similar situations.
I had a parent call me because I took away her daughter's iPad. She was 8 and telling the other students that if they didn't own an iPad, it's because either their parents are poor or didn't love them. The mom came in, and before she meeting could get underway, her phone rang. She didn't excuse herself and began having a business meeting right in front of me. She even got out her iPad to take notes with her super long fingernails tapping on the glass. When she was done, she thanked me for everything and left.
That sounds pretty wild. I can't believe a parent would handle that situation like it's just a normal day. I mean, dealing with her daughter's behavior should have been the priority, but instead, she just took a business call. It's strange how some adults don't see the lessons they should teach their kids. Guess it's just another day in school.
My grandmother has been an English teacher for many years at the high school and college level. While teaching high school English, she was contacted by a parent that complained that her child didn't feel comfortable that a Confederate flag was on display in the classroom. Needless to say, it was an English flag that was on display.
That's an interesting mix-up. Misunderstandings like that can happen, especially when emotions run high. It's funny how a simple flag can spark such a reaction. I can imagine the confusion on both sides. Your grandmother probably handled it calmly, explaining the meaning behind the English flag. It's always good to remind people to look a bit closer before jumping to conclusions. Makes for a good story, though.
I was a year out of grad school and teaching college freshmen for the first time. I had this one parent who fought all his son's battles. He was outraged I gave his son a B on a paper. He actually came to my office and argued with me. He told me he had a PhD and was smarter than me. Once, the kid misspelled my name on a paper's header, and the father insisted his spelling of MY name was correct.
That sounds like a tough situation. It's wild how some parents can be so involved. You'd think they'd let their kids handle their own issues. I can't imagine someone coming to argue like that, especially about something so minor. The misspelling part is pretty funny though. This parent really thought they knew better. It must have been frustrating to deal with all that. I guess some people never really let go.
Hey, race one that I think you'll like. My uncle, incredible guy, one of the smartest men I've ever come across, studied on scholarship at Oxford and got honors, but never had the opportunity beyond that to reach his potential, and worked at a state-funded school in one of Australia's dodgiest towns. His history class was full of kids in gangs and kids who'd been in juvie. One day, some kid just cracked, started screaming and swearing, and when my uncle told him to pipe down, he pulled a knife and lunged at him. Just to put in some context, my uncle had always wanted to go to Vietnam as a kid and had taught himself jiu-jitsu and become a ridiculously good shot with his mail-order make-yourself-Swedish assault rifles. So this kid lunges at him, and he just grabs his wrist and disarms him and holds him until the cops come. When the mother turns up with the principal and has my uncle fired for attacking her son, it was pretty much a downward spiral from then on for him, which is really sad considering his capacity.
That's a wild story. Your uncle sounds like a pretty interesting dude, really smart but ended up in a tough spot. It's crazy how he handled the situation with that kid, but then getting fired for it is just wrong. Must have been tough for him after that, especially given his background. It's a shame when talent and potential get overlooked like that. Life can be pretty unfair sometimes.
I'm a new teacher, so not a huge well to draw from. But we had a parent-teacher conference this year with the parent of a kid who was and is failing abysmally. In that meeting, the father of the student said that he knows exactly what us teachers are dealing with and going through, because he took education classes at a community college so he could learn what teachers learn. I looked at a coworker of mine in the meeting and had to hold back a laugh. The way he said it was so condescending, it was almost funny. That was 4 months ago, and the student hasn't improved, and the dad won't answer emails.
Sounds like a tough situation. That dad must think he knows it all, but it doesn't really help when his kid is still struggling. It's wild how some parents can be so confident without actually stepping into the classroom. It's good you could hold back laughter though. At least you and your coworkers shared a moment, even if it was a bit awkward. Just part of the job, I guess.
I'm a lifeguard, so there are a lot of rules I have to follow to actually keep my job. This little boy cut his foot on a seashell and only required a Band-Aid, so I patched him up and went on with my day. 5 minutes later, his mother comes over, literally dragging the kid through the sand, and cursed me out for putting a Band-Aid on him without telling her, proceeded to call my boss and curse him out as well. TLDR, mom's a psycho.
Sounds like a tough situation. You did your job by helping the kid, but some people just overreact without thinking. It's annoying when parents don't appreciate what you're trying to do. In the end, you're just there to keep everyone safe. Not much you can do about crazy reactions. Just part of the job, I guess.
I'm not a teacher, but when I was in elementary school, I was a rather fat and unpopular kid. On one occasion, I had a mother on a field trip look me up and down and turn to a group of kids who often made fun of me and tell them something that made them laugh. On a second occasion, I had a mother prevent me from going to a classmate's birthday party that most of my 4th grade class went, only to find out later that she made fun of me as being a pig at the party from other classmates. I mean, I get that I was the fat, unpopular kid, but shouldn't those mothers have been acting their age? They were in their 30s and 40s.
It's tough growing up feeling like an outsider. I remember times when adults just didn't get it. They should be setting an example, but sometimes they only add to the problem. It's wild how kids can be cruel, but when adults join in, it hurts even more. Those moments stick with you. You'd think they'd have a better sense of how their words impact a kid, but some just don't.
If you treat a child as if they're godlike, they will act like they can do no wrong. That really sucks. I try to keep my kid from being a spoiled brat. He certainly gets treated like one during holidays. This Christmas he won his cell phone. I told him it would probably not happen, pretty expensive. So he saved up enough money to buy the phone and some of the plan every month by shoveling driveways and selling stuff he doesn't use anymore. He probably received over $800 in gifts, which is just crazy, but we have an enormous family.
It's interesting how kids can get used to being treated a certain way. Your approach seems solid. Letting him save and work for it might teach some good lessons about value. The holidays can really skew things, though. With so many gifts, it's tough to keep perspective. That balance between giving them what they want and teaching them gratitude is tricky. At least he seems to be learning some responsibility along the way.
I did that last year. My son's teacher had her own classroom policy of no self-defense because hitting causes hitting. She said it was a school policy, which I later found out was not the case. After another kindergartner picked up a classroom chair and struck my child in the head with it, I had to go in and have a little chat. Exasperated after going in circles with her over my son's right to defend himself, which he hadn't done because of the rules. I looked her in the eye and asked, how many times would I have to punch you in the face before you felt the need to defend yourself?
That's a pretty wild situation. Trying to navigate school policies can be frustrating, especially when it comes to your kid's safety. It's tough when the adults in charge don't seem to understand basic self-defense. Asking that teacher a question like that must have made your point clear. Sometimes you have to push back for what's right. Hope your son is doing better after that.
I had a smiler instance teaching high school. We were going through the epic poem Beowulf, and I was splicing in lessons about Anglo-Saxon culture, language, religion, etc., and how it still is represented in our world today. Thor's Day/Thursday, Woden's Day/Wednesday, etc. A parent called the school claiming I was teaching her son about Nazi culture and how Nazi culture is a part of our culture today and should be celebrated. It took several meetings to convince the woman that Anglo-Saxon and Aryan are two different things. Several meetings.
That sounds frustrating. It's tough when misunderstandings escalate like that. Teaching about historical cultures can be complicated, especially when people have different perspectives. It's important to clarify things, but some folks can be pretty resistant to seeing the distinction. It's wild how misconceptions can lead to so much drama, though. Good thing you kept it professional and eventually cleared it up.
Anecdotal. My kids just started school, and while they're good kids, they can get out of control just like anyone else their age. The parents are invited to visit the class in the morning, so one morning I went. My son was so excited I was there, he became unfocused and wanted to fool around instead of following the lesson. When the teacher told him to sit down and behave, he said, "I don't have to, my dad is here." I laughed at him and said, "Her class, her rules." He sat. I've been a counselor and have many teachers in my family/friends network, so I know how tough teaching can be. In front of my kids, I make it a point to never counter a teacher, especially in her classroom, because I don't want to erode their role as a leader of the class. Edit. Spelling.
It's pretty relatable when kids get a bit wild in class. I remember when I visited my friend's kid's school. He was all over the place when he saw me. The teacher had to step in, and he tried to play the "Dad's here" card. I just laughed and told him to respect the teacher. It's important to back up teachers and not undermine their authority. They have a tough job.
I feel like this issue is getting worse every time. Overprotective parents that think that doing this for their children will help them somehow. Not so long ago, when you got in trouble, it was your ass on the line. You had to deal with it, and that taught everyone a little something I like to call responsibility. Nowadays, if a student gets low grades, parents will go to school and barrage the teacher, asking them why their son is failing and whatnot. Not only are you being an asshole to someone who, most of the time, wants to see your child succeed as much as you do, but you're being a lousy parent as well.
I get where you're coming from. It's interesting to see how parenting styles have shifted over the years. I remember my own parents letting me handle my own issues. If I had low grades, it was my responsibility to figure it out, not theirs. It taught me a lot, like facing consequences. Now it seems like more parents want to fight battles for their kids. Not sure if that's really helping them in the long run.
This sounds like something that would happen with wet nurses in the past. The child would go and live with the wet nurse and family and build a bond with them only for it to get ripped away when the child was sent to their real family. For instance, Winston Churchill said that he had a closer bond to his wet nurse than to his mother.
It's interesting how strong those early bonds can be. You think about how a kid could end up really attached to someone who's not their biological parent. It's kind of sad to think about being taken away from that caregiver. I had a friend who had a similar experience with their grandparents. They spent a lot of time with them, and when they had to move, it was tough. Just shows how connections matter.
Jesus Christ, that's horrible. This may sound shitty, but it's better that her dad got to her there, where you and your colleague were able to stop him for doing something to her, and not somewhere else where she might have been stuck or trapped by herself. Glad to hear she's a good kid, though. Something like that could mess up a person big time.
It's a tough situation. I think a lot about how important it is to have support during moments like that. Sometimes being in the wrong place can lead to really bad outcomes, but having people around can help. I hope she finds a way to process what happened. It's definitely something that can stick with you for a long time. Glad she's got some good support around her now.
Was an athletic coach at the university level, and this is even more of an issue. Athletes' parents are the worst. I had one mother email me daily about why I should put her child in the game, giving me stats, etc., like I didn't have access to the same information or that I wasn't watching practices. At this point in your child's life, you have to cut the cord. Your child is being paid athletic scholarship to play here, therefore it is their job. Would you email your child's boss with reasons to give them a raise? Parents can be crazy.
It's wild how some parents act. I mean, they don't seem to realize their kid is in a professional environment. Getting daily emails from one mom about stats was something else. It felt like she was trying to manage a job her kid was already being paid for. Just reminds me of those stories where parents get too involved, thinking they know better. Sometimes, you just need to step back and let them grow up.
You'll empathize with my husband. He works at one of the world's best-known museums. He literally threw a 15-year-old French schoolboy out of a side door for vandalizing a globally known artifact with spray paint. He picked the only exit with no camera. The teacher apparently was 100% with his choice.
That's a pretty intense situation. I can see why your husband felt he had to act. Dealing with vandalism, especially at a museum, is a big deal. It must have been a tough call to make, but if the teacher backed him up, it sounds like he did what he thought was necessary. It's a wild story to have in his job for sure.
I attended a school with a lot of deaf and hard of hearing students. It was amazing to see how many of them were so overprotected by their parents who did all of their communicating for them that they never learned how to sign or interact with peers. I was an orientation assistant one year, and I had a mother lead her 18-year-old hard of hearing daughter to the sign and table by her hand. Remember, hard of hearing, not blind, where she proceeded to stand there not making eye contact with anyone while her mother did all the work for her. I saw her around campus a few times that fall, including at a kegger where she had no clue how to interact with anyone. I don't mean talking, I just mean how to act around others. Thankfully, she was enrolled in specialized ASL classes for non-signing deaf students, and by the end of the school year, I saw her signing with a group of friends outside one of the academic buildings.
It's interesting how some people get so much help that they miss out on learning basic skills. I remember seeing someone who was always with their parents, never learning to navigate on their own. It was a struggle for them to connect with others at first. But then I saw them gradually come out of their shell, making friends and finally signing. It's cool to see that kind of growth.
I did an internship at a day facility for delayed adults. There was this one girl, 22, whose family did absolutely everything for her. She will sob crocodile tears at the drop of a dime if she's not getting enough attention, holding her hand, sitting with her, talking to her, etc. She was part of a workshop on sexual health/sex ed for the first few weeks and was doing pretty well before her parents pulled her out. I wasn't in the meeting, but they said something along the lines of her not needing it because she'll never have sex/have a partner, etc. We were also trying to teach her basic bathroom hygiene, wipe, wash hands, every day that she came in, 3 a week, but it would all be unlearned when she got back to us due to her family not letting her do it herself. There's a ton of examples with her and others. It's pretty heartbreaking.
It sounds like a tough situation. I've seen similar things where parents are overly protective, and it can really hold someone back. There's this one friend of mine who also had family that did everything for him. He struggled to gain independence and often felt frustrated. It's rough to watch someone like that, wanting to grow but being kept from it. Sometimes, we just need to let people find their own way.
During my student-teacher days, I too did not become a teacher. My freshman class had a project where they chose a country, put together a PowerPoint on the country, and then wrote a 3-paragraph essay on one thing about that country that fascinated them. Considering that I had to explain that Paris and Africa were not countries after I gave out the assignment, I really shouldn't have expected much. Anyway, I'm grading the essays when I got to the paper about Egypt, and as I'm reading it, I come across a sentence that begins, "The pyramids as shown above." There are no pictures with this essay, so I had the pleasure of Googling the sentence, then printing out and highlighting every sentence she plagiarized. I did this with about half the papers that were turned in.
That reminds me of a group project we did in college. We all picked a country, and one of my friends chose Japan. He ended up copying most of his content online without realizing it wasn't allowed. When we got the grade back, he was baffled by the low score. It was awkward explaining to him that his research wasn't original. Lesson learned, I guess.
I'm in grad school, and several groups got caught plagiarizing on a paper at the end of the last semester. In the syllabus and student handbook, it clearly states that plagiarizing is ground for immediate expulsion. However, they all denied having read that. The administration caved as well, and none of them even got so much of the reprimand. So, it still happens unfortunately, but good on you for trying to make someone deal with consequences.
It's frustrating, right? You work hard and then see others cut corners without any fallout. It's like a slap in the face when rules don't mean anything. You'd think they'd take it seriously, especially in grad school where everyone's supposed to know better. But I guess sometimes the system just lets things slide. It's disappointing, really, knowing some people just get away with it.
I worked with someone who was attending college online the same time I was. I was going through a local college while she attended one of the private national ones. Her last semester of a BS in business, she got caught plagiarizing a paper. She admitted to me that she had purchased every paper she ever turned in. She was obviously smart enough to do the papers herself, as she passed every test with an A without cheating, but was too lazy to write a paper. End result, she lost 4 years' worth of credits and any chance of moving up off of the production floor to a better job with our employer. She ended up pointing out a year later.
It's interesting how people can be so capable yet still make poor choices. I knew someone similar in college who had the skills but took shortcuts. She breezed through exams but didn't want to put in the effort for assignments. In the end, it cost her a lot. It's a reminder that some risks just aren't worth it, and sometimes the easy way out leads to bigger problems down the line.
I gave a similar assignment to a senior physics class. One turned in a paper half-copied from Wikipedia and half from About.com. I pointed this out to him, and he didn't understand why it was wrong. I asked him to write it in his own words. The new version was nearly identical because he only changed a few words to their synonyms. That's what kids learn as their own words now.
It's interesting how some students approach assignments these days. This reminds me of a friend in college who always tried to get by with minimal effort. He thought changing a word here and there counted as original work. The professors weren't having it, and it just confused him. Sometimes it felt like he didn't get the point of learning at all. Just went through the motions.
If that was my kid, I would force them to rewrite the assignment by hand, none of this computer shit, and resubmit it. Then it's up to the teacher whether to give partial credit or not. If not, tough shit. Of course, that being said, I would hope I would raise a kid who knew stealing was wrong to begin with.
I get the idea. Teaching kids responsibility is important. Making them redo their work seems like a good way to drive that point home. It's all about instilling values early on. A kid needs to understand that shortcuts don't pay off. But I guess it's also about guidance and having open conversations about right and wrong. Hopeful thinking can go a long way in shaping their choices down the line.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love,